Hello and welcome to episode 65 of the Epic Classroom Podcast. I'm Trevor Muir, and this is where we explore how to make learning meaningful, dynamic, and transformative. Epic, so students don't just get through school, they thrive because of it. All right, welcome back to the podcast. Did I ever tell you that before I became a teacher, I worked at a long-term care pharmacy packing pills? That's right. So I went to Florida State University and I graduated with an English degree, but I had no idea what I wanted to do with it until the very end of my college career where I had this spark of inspiration that I wanted to be a teacher. But you can't just start teaching just because you have an English degree. You have to have a teaching certificate. And so I started the long, arduous process of getting a master's degree to get my teaching certificate. But now I didn't have any family helping me with college, and I had to pay for the whole thing by myself. And so my very first job out of college had nothing to do with education. It was at a long-term care pharmacy packing pills all day long, and it is as exciting as you thought it would be. I would stand at this counter for hours and hours, 8 hours to be exact, every single day, emptying pill bottles into my hand and then putting them in little resealable packages, and then I'd seal it up and then I'd pick up the next one, and I would just do this all day long. And part of this job actually required that I knew the generic names of these different medications, and so I had to know that if I had to pack 30 Benadryl, I was packing 30 different Hydramine, or if I was going to do Keflex, it was Celefexin or whatever. This was a long time ago now, so don't hold me to that. But that's what I had to do all day long, and I didn't love it. But when you stand at a counter packing pills all day long, making $11.25 an hour, you start to get to know some of the people around you. And I became friends with some of these people that were also packing pills with me all day long. And I really enjoyed getting to work with these people, and several of them were really like mentor types as it relates to this job, and they would help me figure out what I needed to do and how to do it well, and teaching me systems. And it was great to have these people around me. And also, I forgot to mention, when I graduated college, I met my wife. We got married right away. We got married right after college, and we moved from Florida up to the state of Michigan, where we knew nobody. I mean, I was just following her, and so I didn't know anybody in Michigan, and I didn't have any friends here except for these people standing next to me at this counter packing pills. And so it was great, except it wasn't great. But it was great having people that I enjoyed being around, and my very first job as a real-life grown-up. And then after about 6 months of working here, packing pills, making some huge amounts of money, $11.25 an hour, the management for the pharmacy announced that they were going to start shifting people around and moving some people to different locations, different pharmacies throughout the city where we live. And I was like, well, I don't want to do that. These are my only friends. These are the only people I know in this entire state. Not to mention, they are really, really helpful, and I like working with them, and I don't want to move to a different location. I was finally learning the system and medications, and I was learning from these work mentors, and I didn't want to go somewhere else. And so my 22-year-old self decided to do something about it. I was going to meet and request that I not be moved. And so I got a meeting with the CEO of the company, the person who was making this decision to move people around. And I sat down with him, and he was this serious guy in a 3-piece suit. And I'm just this little 22-year-old wearing a collared shirt, because that's what you do when you're grown up and you go to work. And I sat down, and I just kind of mumbled out that this was really important to me to stay where I was, and that I was making friends here, and I think it's only right that I stay here, and I respectfully asked to be kept where I was and not moved to the other pharmacy location. And he looked at me, and I was like, oh yeah, that speech got through to this guy. And so he looked at me some more, he gave me a little smile, and he said, you know what, Trevor? the best thing for you right now is to move to another location. So you'll be moving tomorrow. Like, wait, what? He didn't say yes. He said no. And he smiled during it. And he moved me to a different location. This was so disappointing, right? Like, I mean, I'm thinking to myself as I'm walking out of there, totally defeated, right? This wasn't like in school where if I got shot down by the teacher, I can just pester him the next day. This was the CEO of a big company, and he just absolutely said no, and he kind of laughed at me about it. Didn't like that. Just a little spoiler alert, I didn't stay in the pharmaceutical industry for that much longer. I moved on to a different job. It was a little bit more flexible for me to go back to school and become a teacher, which I haven't looked back since. But I'm telling you, I walked out of there so disappointed. This was my first big ask, the first time I ever made like a request in my career world. And I was asking myself, could I have been more persuasive, right? Like maybe it was hopeless from the outset. Maybe my request was never going to be granted, but maybe I could have done it better. Right? Like maybe I could have done a better professional request. Maybe I could have put on nicer clothes or come up with better words or not told him that I wanted to stay with my friends because that's not what you say to the CEO. I don't know. Maybe I should have found some type of pitch about why this is actually going to be beneficial for his company or I don't know. But whatever it was, it didn't work. And I was severely disappointed. And I went to that other location and the world kept spinning, by the way. But I got to tell you, when I was growing up, learning how to ask like this, how to make a professional request was not something I was used to doing, right? Like, of course, I made requests throughout my life, but none that would actually, that had gravitas to it like this, none that would actually move me in the direction that I wanted to move. And so I didn't really know how to do this. This was a new type. This was a new form of communication for me, where I really needed data. And I needed a strong argument, and I needed a strong presentation. I needed to empathize with who I was talking to as I crafted my request and learned how to ask for help, but I didn't know how to do that. But I tell you what, this wasn't the last time I had to make a formal professional request. Turns out that's a big part of career and life, especially as an educator, right? Like I remember I've told you about this before on the podcast where my students held this big event for World War II veterans where they created films and artwork and writing for them. And I wanted to hold this event at an actual theater to host my students' work. And so I had to call a theater and ask them to use their space for free, right? I had to make this request, and I had to put time into thinking about how I was going to make this request if I wanted them to say yes, right? Like I've had to ask for permission to take my students on a field trip. I remember one time asking my principal if we could read a different text for my English class, right? Like, which would require my school to buy a completely different set of books and trust that I could build some curriculum around this. And it would mean that we're not using the books that are tried and true that we've had for a long, long time. But I really wanted to teach a different book. The book was called East of Eden, and it had such a profound impact on my world and life. And I was teaching high school seniors, and I just really wanted them to read this book as well. It meant so much to me. And so I spent some time thinking about how I can make this request. How can I give that emotional appeal and talk about the impact it had on me, but then how I think it could happen to our students and the impact it could have on them and how I could potentially teach the curriculum for this. And I had to put together the budget for it. And then I sat down with my principal and our assistant principal in charge of curriculum, and I made my pitch. I made the professional request, and they said yes. And it was it was so meaningful, right? This meant so much to my students, but it meant so much to me to be able to do this, and it wouldn't have happened if I didn't request it in a way that I would get what I wanted, right? If it wasn't persuasive enough and honest enough and authentic enough and backed by enough information, right? Asking and making requests is a vital form of communication. If you want to be happy in your career and in your life, we have to know how to ask for things. We have to know how to do it well. And so I think it's really important that we start teaching students how to do this well. How do you make professional requests long before that you enter the workforce? because someday they're going to have to make requests. They're going to have to request raises. They're going to have to request promotions. They're going to have to request an allocation of resources or a change of locations or not changing locations, whatever. It's part of life to be able to ask for things. The people who don't ask for things don't get the things that they want, right? Like I remember somebody, my grandfather, a mentor to me, he said to me, you don't get what you don't ask for, right? Another thing he used to always says is the squeaky wheel gets the oil, right? We have to be able to advocate and request and ask for things. And so we've got to teach students how to do that. They don't have to learn the hard way. I mean, that's not true. You do learn the hard way sometimes. Do I wish that CEO of the pharmaceutical company, do I wish that he would have said yes? Yeah, I guess so. But that was like almost 20 years ago now. And I'm kind of glad he said no, because it pushed me out of that really comfortable, cushy job of making $11.25 an hour, and it put me on my path to becoming an educator. So I'm like, you know what? Yeah, I'm glad he said no. But I also learned more about making professional requests from him saying no. It helped me refine that skill a bit. It helped me get stronger at that communication skill. Communication is something I like to talk about a lot with educators and students. It's something that I'm writing extensively about right now in my book, The Portrait of the Graduate, is how do we teach real communication skills to students? Of course, academic conversations and discussions, but then also the type of communication they're going to need in their professional lives. And one of those is this type of communication where they're asking for things, where they're advocating and requesting. And I think one way that we can start teaching students how to do this well, how to start building that communication muscle, is by just giving them regular low-stakes opportunities to practice it. You know, and we're going to get into bigger ways in a minute, but start with something as simple as, you know, if students want something, well, then I need you to ask it in an appropriate way. If you want a deadline extension or a different resource or feedback in some structured way, I want you to ask for it in an appropriate way. Even if it's just easier for me to say, yeah, I'll give you an extension. Nope. You need to ask for it respectfully, but then also in a way that really makes your case well. I actually put together a resource this week as I was thinking about this. Like, all right, what kind of framework would I want students to ask me if they want an extension on a deadline? Or if they wanted, let's say that I was having students write an essay and a student wanted to do some type of oral exam instead, and they wanted to make that request to me. To me, it's not enough to just say, hey, can I do an oral exam? It's like, well, I want to know why. Why would that benefit you? Why would that still give me the information that you need? Why is this not necessarily an inconvenience on anybody else? Or if it is, why is it a worthy inconvenience? I want you to think through how you make that request, because then I'm getting more information that's going to inform my decision, but also they're developing the skill of making professional requests. And so I put together a little 5-piece framework that just simply teaches students how to ask questions in, you know, a professional way that they can use long after the classroom, right? Long after their time in school. So the name of the document, it's free. It's just a Canva doc or a Google doc that I put together. So I will put the link to it in the show notes if you are interested in giving this to your students. But it starts with 1, know what you're asking for. And so before you ask, stop and think about what you actually need. Do you need more time on an assignment, extra help, clarification on instructions? And I put in the document or in the framework, being clear about your request helps your teacher understand how to best support you. So 1 is clarity. Number 2 is explain why you're asking. So be honest about your reason. You don't need to make excuses. Just explain to me what's going on. You know, examples, I misjudged how long this project would take. Or I've been struggling with the research part and I need a little bit more guidance. Or I'm not connecting with this book and I want to choose a different one. And I put again in that document, I said, honesty builds trust. Number 3 is ask clearly and respectfully. Can you see that theme of clarity? That's such a big part of asking and making requests. Ask clearly and respectfully. Be polite and specific about what you're requesting. Your tone matters just as much as your words. Try saying, would it be possible to have one more day to finish the assignment? Or could I schedule time to go over this part with you? Or would you be willing to give me some feedback before I turn it in? Avoid vague and demanding language like, I need more time, or you never explain this. And it's like, yeah, is that just because I want you to be polite? Yeah, I guess so. But also, that just is, it's not as effective. If you can find ways to lower your tone or soften your tone, that's going to help you find more success. Number 4 is offer a plan. Show that you're responsible and ready to follow through. Explain what you'll do with the extra time or support that you're asking for. So, for example, if I can turn it in tomorrow, I'll use tonight to revise the conclusion and double check my citations, right? Like you're showing that there's some responsibility backing this up. This shows you're not just asking for a favor, you're asking for a chance to do your very best work. And then number 5 on the framework is follow up with gratitude, right? Say thank you. Always thank your teacher for listening, no matter the outcome. So if your request is approved, say thank you, I really appreciate it. And if it's not, which by the way, it's okay to say no to requests. That's part of life. You can say no to students if you feel like you've given them enough time on the assignment and their justification just is not strong enough. You can say, I hear what you're saying. Thank you for asking in this way. Nope, it's still due by the end of the day. Tell students, I want you to say, hey, thanks for considering it. I'll do my best with the time I have. You can be disappointed, but your gratitude shows maturity and it keeps communication positive. And so that is this little framework that I put together. Feel free to get that. But I just think it's important that we're teaching students this type of language. It's building skills. It's helping them understand, this is a proper process for asking for things. And if you do this, it might lead to more success. So that's one way to do it. Keep it low stakes. Build it into everyday vernacular. Another way to do it is to actually build learning experiences that have this aspect of asking for requests, making requests, asking for things, asking for resources, asking for permission. That's at the heart of what students are trying to accomplish in school. When students pitch ideas or request permission to try something new or seek out input from outside experts, they learn that communication isn't just about sharing information. It's about taking initiative, right? I worked with an elementary school recently, All Saints Academy, which is just an amazing school here in Grand Rapids. They had their K-2 students, kindergarten through second grade, do this big request to their school board about how they should use funding to build an outdoor playground. And they came up with data, they did surveys, they put together presentations with visuals, but then also written scripts. And then they had to stand up in front of the school board, and I got invited to be on this panel as well. And they pitched their ideas to them about how they should spend some of this money. And it was unbelievable, right? They were learning how to make professional requests right there in the moment for school. And also their teachers were brilliant, and they built in all of this different content and made it more robust in that content subject matter way. But at the heart of their project, the task that was driving it all was this professional request. In the same way, one time I was working at a school district. So I was a teacher at this district that just was in the process of passing this massive bond. So like $50 million was being passed by the community to support the school system. And it was really, really exciting. And they, of course, were building new football fields and athletic facilities. But then they were also getting input from all over the community about how this money should be spent. And they were asking parents, and they were asking business owners and community leaders and organizations. They even asked educators, which was quite lovely to give some input on that. But there was one group of people in our community who were not actively being asked on how this bond money should be spent. Do you want to guess who that group is? Yeah, it was the students. And the students knew it. There was like this buzz in the air, and they were like, oh my gosh, they're making all these marketing videos to try to get this bond passed, and I see billboards about it, and my parents are talking about it, and they've even asked how we want to spend it. And it was like a loud thing. There was this loud sentiment that students were feeling left out of the bond decision. And so I was like, well, this sounds like a project idea. And so I let students talk about that and air out some of their frustrations. And I said, all right, I want you to create a proposal to pitch to the school district and the school board about how you think some of the bond money should be spent. So that was their big task, right? Like if you want to think of it in like the terms of a story, right? The conflict of the story is that we have this bond money, but students aren't getting input. So what do we do about it? That's the driving question. And so the rest of that learning task was about answering that question. And they put together their proposals. And at the end of the project, I invited the school board into my classroom and administrators. And throughout that day, I think I had 5 different preps for this exact class, or maybe 4. I had an open door policy for administrators to come through my classroom and listen to these proposals. And they took me up on it. We had school board members, the principal and vice principals, but then also district administration. The superintendent showed up, the assistant soup, and they listened to my students pitch their ideas. And some of their ideas were kind of ridiculous, right? Like one group was like, we should have a Chick-fil-A in the cafeteria. And that group was unsuccessful. To this day, that high school does not have a Chick-fil-A in the cafeteria. Another group was like, we should have a stadium, right? Like a dome over the football field. I'm like, well, I don't think that's going to happen. And it didn't happen, but they pitched it. Another group came up and they asked for the funding to build a sensory deprivation room for students needing a place to calm down. And they told stories and they provided data explaining the needs of neurotypical students and how important it was for them to have a room with very little sensory overload so that students that might be just needing a calming space to go and calm down in the middle of a school day. And then they shared research and data about the impact this can have on their academics and their emotional well-being, their behavioral well-being. And they presented all this information and they did it really, really well. And they used logos and pathos and ethos, persuasive writing elements that I was going to teach anyway, but then they did it in a way that mattered and that was meaningful. And they pitched it to the board and the board loved it. And right now, if you go to that high school and you go to several of the elementary schools and the middle school, if you go to that school district, you will see most of the buildings have sensory deprivation rooms in them, right? They liked what the students were cooking up, right? Like the students had a great idea, but great ideas aren't enough. Being able to ask for that great idea to take action matters. Having the skill, having the communication skill to make professional requests. That is so essential. That is a skill that students are going to need their whole lives in work, in marriage, in friendship, in community, right? We have to know how to ask. We have to know how to advocate. And I don't think we're born knowing how to do that, right? I say it all the time. These skills like communication and collaboration and critical thinking and adaptability, they are all like muscles. The more you work them out, the stronger that they become. The less that you work them out, the more that they atrophy. That's why I really didn't know how to sit down with that CEO and advocate for myself and explain why I think it was a bad idea to move me. I didn't have the skill. I didn't work on that before. But we don't have to. We can give that gift to our students. We can design learning experiences and use protocols and frameworks that teach them how to do it well so that when they are no longer in school, they're going to know how to ask for feedback, and they're going to know how to ask for opportunities. They're going to know how to ask for what they need. And the earlier we help students develop this muscle, this communication muscle, this muscle of knowing how to ask, the earlier we can do that, the more confident and capable they're going to be when it really counts. Because in the end, the old saying is true. You don't get what you don't ask for, but you can learn how to ask, and that lesson can change everything. All right. Well, thank you so much for listening to this week's episode. Can I make an ask of you? If you liked it, would you mind sharing it with any of your educator friends who you think would benefit from this? And if you like it, maybe even share it on social media or leave me a review or just shoot me an email and tell me that you're listening. And I appreciate you digging in to this week's episode 65. We got 65 of these already. Episode 65 of the Epic Classroom Podcast. And if you want to dig deeper, go to trevormuir.com or follow me on social media. Pretty easy to find there. Talk to you next time.